By far my favorite Bethesda game ever made, in my opinion, is Oblivion. And while most of that likely comes down to nostalgia of it also being my first, a big part of it comes from what I think are truly the best quests and factions Bethesda has ever done. Because you see, Oblivion is home to quests where you're transported into paintings and nightmares, Daedric statues that literally come to life, the Shivering Isles and all of its wackiness, or even coming up against the Grey Fox and the Thieves Guild faction questline. But out of all of these journeys, none are cooler and more feral than the Dark Brotherhood. You originally get recruited into this foreboding murder cult if you have killed an innocent person in the game, and when you fall asleep for the next time, you're awoken by a mysterious figure and message beckoning you to join a secretive organization. This eventually leads you down the path of joining the Dark Brotherhood proper, and it's here you get to meet Ochiva, the head of the sanctuary of the guild in one of the major cities. And after earning more of Achiva's trust, she eventually tells you she is sending you on a special mission, where you will need to travel to the sprawling city of Skingrad to meet with another cult member named Fafnir, who holds the key to grant access to a very special building. Ochiva tells you that the Brotherhood has lured in a handful of people who have wronged the organization into this building, and told them that they all must remain locked inside until someone finds hidden treasure that will make them rich, playing into all of their immense greed. But your orders are much more sinister. Instead, you are instructed that you will need to kill all of the guests, ideally without any of them finding out, after which the building will be unlocked and you'll be free to go. And while the setup for this quest is somewhat absurd, it's also so awesome for a faction mission in a game like this, and leads to maybe the best quest in all of Elder Scrolls, and potentially even the most memorable in Bethesda history. Stepping inside, you are immediately greeted by a small Nord woman named Matilde Petit, who helps you get acquainted with the other 4 guests and inquires about who you are. If you so choose, you can even right at the start here reveal to her that you're an assassin, and she will simply just laugh it off, albeit much more wary of you in the future. And so begins your journey on how to figure out how to kill all of these combatants without them even knowing. The reason this quest is so fantastic though is all of the intrigue that takes place while you're on your path getting there. Each of the guests has a disposition to you that can be improved or destroyed depending on your discussions with them and others trapped in the house. And as you talk to everyone more, you get to see the dynamics of the place, that being who is friend and foes alike, who are secret lovers, or who's about to break out into all-out brawls. Simply walking around this estate and listening to the other NPCs engage in conversation is super fun, and the amount of permutations in dialogue here is staggering, where depending on each of your relationships with each character, it can drastically affect how you speak with all the others. So the whole thing becomes a massive set of mind games of sorts, where you will be turning certain people against one another while trying to ally with the rest. And this crazy game of murder chess becomes even more interesting as you start inflicting pain on your victims. Because if discovered, the others will start to freak out about a killer amongst them, and it's your job to convince everyone it's not you, which can result in situations where you can even make other characters kill each other because they assume you're telling the truth about who the murderer really is. It's such a great and varied quest that without a doubt is just Bethesda at their best. Open sandbox levels with interesting NPC dialogue and AI that all interact in wild and weird ways, and even for all the faults this quest still has, it goes to show what Bethesda can do with some actually good writing and a solid setup. Even the ways in which you can kill the guests are so varied and wild too, like convincing poor Matilda Petit to check the downstairs cellar for something while everyone else is away, after which you follow her in and leap on her like a lion chasing its prey. And watching the insanity and antics that ensue as everyone starts to doubt each other is hilarious, knowing full well the entire time that you're the killer at large. It's the type of thing I wish Bethesda would do more in their recent games, and more than anything, I hope we can get some really memorable quests like this in the Elder Scrolls 6, because for me, that's what makes me think about and write about a game, even decades later from its initial release. All of the modern-day Elder Scrolls games have begun in a very similar way. A prisoner finding his way out of his or her shackles and thrusting themselves into a brand new world. But it would seem the similarities stop there. In Morrowind, you play as a reincarnated general who turns out to be the revered and prophesized Nerevarine. In Oblivion, you play as the hero of Kvatch that saves an entire realm from being consumed by Oblivion's chaos. And in Skyrim, you play as this idiot. On paper, these seem like obviously different characters and people, After all, how could the Neverine and Dragonborn be the same people? However, this is where it gets interesting. You see, countless years ago, the world of Nirn was created by a divine god called Lorkhan. This god deceived all his peers in the divine realm into pooling their resources to create Nirn, and this angered them very much. As punishment, he was killed by the other divines, led by Akatosh, that giant red dragon boy in Oblivion. His heart was thrust from his body and crashed into the area of Morrowind, creating the Red Mountain, and he was forever a banished and lost soul. Still, throughout all of history, many races have told stories of supposed Shezarines, which are believed to be mortal incarnations of the missing god, Lorkhan. So could it be that in every Elder Scrolls game, we are actually a Shezarine, a mortal amalgamation of Lorkhan himself, on a mission to defend the realm that he was responsible for creating in the first place? It would explain how we are always tasked with such important accomplishments and take the reins of important characters at such vital moments in history, leaving lasting impacts. It's also heavily implied from many texts in the game that this just might be the case. Oblivion is my personal favorite Elder Scrolls game, in large part because it was the first one I played as a kid, but also because it has many lesser known and amazing quest lines that truly dip into the scary and thrilling side of the series. One of these that many people don't know about tells the story of an Altmor, or elf, mage who has stolen Vamira's powerful orb. Vamira is the Daedric Prince of Nightmares, and she is known for casting many souls into some of the most hellish places known to man. But in a twisted turn of fate, Vamira has not done this to our Altmer named Arkved. Rather, he has stolen the orb from her himself. For some unknown reason, Arkved has thrust himself into a twisted and demented nightmare, and you are tasked with going into this dream and getting Vamira's orb back for her. And so you do, and you are met with a desolate and dark landscape, one of, if not the scariest in the entire Elder Scrolls series, full of weird and demented sounds, small pathways leading to nothing, and a host of horrifying monsters in the dark. So as you make your way through the dungeon, you finally reach Arkved's tower, and it is here you find his fateful letter. There is no world so great as the world of the mind. There is no voyager so well traveled as the traveler in the land of dreams. There is no abyss so deep as the well of terrors that lies within each of us. I have plumbed its depths. Arkved seemingly finds great joy living in his greatest nightmare and falling deeper into the madness within his own mind. But we are never given any more than this. The most perplexing part about the entire ordeal is we still have no idea why Arkved stole Vamira's orb in the first place, or why he has cast himself into his own living hell. It makes us seriously question who this man is, and more importantly, what he is up to and trying to accomplish. Could there be more than meets the eye here? Even after traveling into the depths of Arkved's own mind, we still have so many questions left unanswered. The Grey Fox is one of the most mysterious and infamous figures in all of Tamriel. We were originally introduced to him in Oblivion as the leader of the Thieves Guild, where he has sat at its head for over 300 years. Not as a mer with a long lifespan, but weirdly as a human. Some regard him as fact, and some fiction, with many wanted letters spread throughout the Imperial City, and some news reports like this one. Grey Fox, man or myth? Is a so-called Thieves Guild member masterminding all the thefts in the Imperial City? Captain Harmonious Lex of the Imperial Watch seems to think so. When asked about the Thieves Guild and its mythical leader, the Grey Fox, the captain was quite emphatic. This one man is responsible for all crime in the city. The energetic and tenacious Captain Lex has therefore devoted himself to apprehending this masked menace. When questioned on the subject, Adamus Philada, Legion Commander and Captain Lex's immediate superior, had the following response. Ridiculous. The Grey Fox is but a fairy tale. There is no such thing as a Thieves Guild, and there never has been. Stories of an unstoppable thief called the Grey Fox have been circulating around the Imperial City for centuries. The stories claim he can turn invisible at will, shrink himself down to the size of a mouse, turn to mist and seep under locked doors, and perform any number of truly unbelievable feats. If even half of these stories are true, Captain Lex will have his hands full capturing the Grey Fox. If the player decides to follow the Oblivion Thieves Guild to its completion though, one of the best quest lines ever in Elder Scrolls, there's a big reveal at the end. The Grey Fox isn't actually just one person, but rather a large group of different people who have chosen to wear the cowl of the Grey Fox, otherwise known as Nocturnal's Cowl, giving them the power of the Daedric Prince's control of the sphere of night and darkness. You see, millennia ago, the first Thieves Guild leader ever actually managed to steal the cowl from Nocturnal, and thus she cursed it to forever banish its wearer, forcing all those who love and know them to forget about them forever. Even though the player is able to remove the curse from the cowl in Oblivion, it still has horrifying ramifications for the past. Who are these great thieves of history? And how do some people remember and tell stories of them? Could it be that the wearers of the cowl are nothing but figments of our imagination? And just how much of the Thieves Guild past can we truly trust now? We may never truly know. Tamriel is host to many great towers, whether it be the Red Tower at Morrowind's volcano or the glorious White Gold Tower, also known as the Imperial Palace in the center of Cyrodiil, the centerpiece of the biggest city in Oblivion's mainline game. But perhaps the most interesting tower is actually the Adamantine Tower in High Rock, which is host to one of the most important lore events of all time. Also called the Zero Tower, the Adamantine Tower was built with perfectly smooth zero stones that made the walls glisten in the light, and it is the birthplace of what modern civilizations call convention. You see, in Elder Scrolls, convention was a major event during the Dawn era, where Akatosh, after the betrayal from Lorkhan, banished his heart to Morrowind, and along with this, devised the Edada, the original spirits that ruled over the new land of Nirn. These Edada were called gods and demons by the humans, and Aedra and Daedra by the Aldmer or elves. This Adamantine Tower was in many ways the birthplace of modern-day Nirn, but even to this day it houses many dark and interesting secrets. Deep within its walls lies a peculiar device called the Argent Aperture, a giant ring of 13 concentric circles, of which the meaning no one knows to this day. It is said that this megastructure could simply be a clock tracking the progression of each of the eras the world has progressed through so far. But some philosophers think that this device may actually be a riddle, which if unlocked could be a doorway to an entirely new realm beyond our comprehension, a realm above the gods, the Daedra, and above life itself. And as one of the oldest, if not the oldest structure in Tamriel, this Adamantine Tower presents an amazing amount of possibilities as to just And as one of the oldest, if not the oldest structures in all of Tamriel, the Adamantine Tower presents an amazing amount of possibilities as to what might be behind the Argent Aperture that's housed inside. The Elder Scrolls as a series seems to have a particularly potent knack at casting a spell on players, and by that I mean an ability to transport us to entirely new worlds where we feel completely immersed and enveloped. If you look online at game theories and long-form analysis, a lot of the best performing videos in these categories are from Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and a big reason for that are the mysterious locations full of questions that add so much to the worlds and their character, while also giving the fan base an endless amount of things to speculate on. But out of all of the places in Elder Scrolls which spawn crusades like this, maybe none are more captivating than Hackdirt and the story of the Deep Ones. Found in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, at one point in your journey you can stumble upon a distraught and worried Argonian mother in a popular inn, who exclaims that her young and innocent daughter Dharma has gone missing. This Dharma herself is actually a person you met earlier in game, but it's only after your first introductions and upon returning to the same city later that the infamous shadow over Hackdirt Hackdirt quest kicks into gear. Her mother gives you the route that they walked before she went missing and begs you to help her out. And if you start to trace through that same route through the nearby densely populated woodlands, you eventually stumble upon a completely remote and hidden town known as Hackdirt. Immediately as you enter the town, citizens start to either hide in their houses or simply ignore you. And if you question anyone about the disappearance of Dharma, you are met with nothing but short answers and concerned expressions. The more people you start to ask, the more commotion begins to stew as well, where if you are sneaking around the buildings, you can even hear multiple people gossiping and whispering, asking exactly what you're doing here. Something extremely wrong is obviously going on in this town, but you can't quite put your finger on it yet. But with the citizens acting so creepily, and lots of buildings in the town donning burnt infrastructure or strange symbolism, it's clear that we will need to investigate what's going on further. At one point, you even discover that a specific patron in town has been following you for some time, and that no matter where you go, will be just a couple of steps behind you, watching your every move like a hawk stalking its prey. But just when you think you've exhausted all options, you may stumble upon one specific resident named Jiv Harel. Immediately, if you question him about Dharma, he will shush you and expediently explain that he cannot talk here, but that the young girl is in grave danger. If you follow him to a more remote location, he will explain that 80 years ago, the citizens of Hackdirt discovered a grave evil. Miners in the massive cave networks beneath the town unearthed a discovery that would change them forever. Strange and disturbing beings, they nicknamed the Deep Ones, roamed and stalked in the dark, with creaks and groans that echoed off the claustrophobic walls and sent shivers down the spines of any who heard them. But even more horrifying, some of the unlucky miners began to experience unexplainable ailments and symptoms, turning into what were called the Brethren, feral human constructs with distorted faces and bodies that would hiss and aggressively attack others. In a panic, the town began to worship these now hidden Deep Ones and were told that in order to remain safe, they would need to make human sacrifices to their newly found gods. Meaning deep below your very feet, Dharma could very well be sitting in a prison cell, chained to the walls of a dark and damp cave, waiting to be devoured by things we don't even understand. And well, it's one of the darkest stories in all of Elder Scrolls, but also opens up so many mysteries as to the history of Hackdirt and what the Deep Ones even are. For example, in the church in town, if you sneak inside at night and open up a book on the sermon table, you are met with a barrage of Daedric symbols and iconography, strongly implying that the Deep Ones themselves may be Daedric princes that are forcing people to kill for their own amusement, most likely Lord Dagon or Molag Bal. But also, considering the actual name, Deep Ones, maybe it could be a reference to the Dwemer, who are also called the Deep Elves in many lore tombs. More interestingly though, some in the Elder Scrolls community have begun to speculate that the Deep Ones could be the race of sentient fat toad people called the Slowed, which are known to create massive slave networks and work with Daedric princes. This theory specifically holds a lot of weight as well, because if all of the Daedric symbols in the book are translated into a more readable language, the contents exactly match the text we can find from a Slowed writer in the Elder Scrolls offshoot game Redguard. However, regardless of what actually is going on with the Deep Ones, this small and remote town in the middle of the forest is such an intriguing mystery. After all, what happened to the burnt down buildings we can see? How many people have been kidnapped and sacrificed here? What truly is going on with the Brethren who have lost their minds deep underground? And what more do these people have to hide? Because the more you walk around Hackdirt and investigate its storied past, the more you realize there are so many more questions than there are answers. And even in a series with so many places like this, none quite leave the same lasting impression as the shadow that looms over this quaint and beautiful town in the middle of a dark forest. Almost ironically, for the first province on this list, we are turning to the setting of my personal favorite Elder Scrolls game of all time, Oblivion. Set in Cyrodiil, also known as the Imperial Province, this region is at the heart of all Imperial governance and trade, quite literally at the center of the continent. And it's also the staging ground for the Imperial City itself, capital of the Tamrielic Empire, and one of the most impressive cities in canon. The geography of the region is characterized by a mostly temperate climate, with many staples you would expect to see in any high fantasy setting, like minotaurs, zombies, centaurs, giant rats, annoying crabs, and a dizzying amount of wolves, deer, and bears in the woods. It means that while many other regions of Tamriel can seem almost foreign or alien to those new to the series, Cyrodiil is actually the perfect place to start if you need something that's more familiar. Almost everywhere you go will either be a woodland retreat or a massive sprawling valley. And because of that, despite the pervasiveness of dangerous cave networks beneath ruins and mountains, for most people living in Cyrodiil, the experience is fairly safe. Guard patrols stalk through the night to keep major roads protected. There are multiple major cities all within a semi-close distance to one another with high walls for defense, and at the center of it all sits the Imperial City itself, which is home to hundreds of famous shops and markets of which you can buy or sell anything your heart desires. And afterwards, you can spend some of your hard-earned coin at the nearby Colosseum, which boasts fights between gladiators and mythical creatures out for blood. On top of this, Cyrodiil is one of the most educated cultures in all of Tamriel, with many citizens being fully literate and lots of wealth to be found all around the province. This doesn't mean, however, that Cyrodiil isn't home to large amounts of inequality, as some cities like Skingrad, Leowyn, and Anvil live in relative luxury, while Bravil, in contrast, for example, is characterized by rampant homelessness and stealing. But maybe most interesting of all, Cyrodiil is also a breeding ground to lots of different cultures and religions, and with that, is a hotbed for many grand conflicts. During the First Era, the province was actually under the control of the Aelids, a race of elves who stemmed from the Somerset Altmer that long ago during the Merethic era had taken control of the heartland of Tamriel. These Aelid rulers at the time subjected the Nedic humans of the region into harsh slavery. For those of you who don't know, the Needs were an ancient race of humankind that existed on the continent even before the Nords, and situated themselves into small tribes with huge variations in how ways of life were conducted, similar to, say, our most up-to-date understandings of primitive peoples in around 2000 BC in our real lives. One Nedic woman named Alessia, after apparently receiving a vision from the dragon god of time Akatosh, began a revolt against the Aeliad Empire, uniting many bands and tribes of different people and cultures together to all rise up against their oppressors. With the help of the newly arrived Nordic peoples and their firepower to the north, Alessia and the rebels were able to overthrow the Aeliad elves, and in the wake of their destruction, she founded the pantheon of the Eight Divines, compromised between many Marish, Nordic, and Nedic beliefs into one sort of super religion that tried to take customs and traditions of all of them. In fact, this religious system still lives on into the modern day, albeit with one notable change we'll talk about here shortly. Nonetheless, this period marked the original founding of the Alessian Empire, which went on to quickly gain control of more and more land nearby its borders. This time of prosperity did not last forever though, as thousands of years later, near the end of the First Era, a massive invasion from the Akaviri continent made landfall in Tamriel, with the focus of its might being sent to the people of Cyrodiil. Almost by some sort of miracle, the Akaviri were defeated at the Battle of Pale Pass by a renowned commander named Remen Cyrodiil. Sound familiar? Who then took some of the defeated warriors under his wing and had them swear loyalty, after which he established a new nation-state, declared himself emperor, and transformed Cyrodiil and its culture into what we still know it as today, taking a lot of medieval European influence from the nobility and high rock at the time to the west. By the middle of the Second Era though, Cyrodiil once again found itself in a state of chaos known as the Interregnum, which lasted for 400 years. After the assassination of many of the highest-ranking Imperial officers on one bloody night known as Sun's Dawn in year 430 of the Second Era, multiple cities started to turn against the Empire. Imperial infrastructure fell into disarray and despair, and many petty warlords or tribes were vying to take control during this vacuum of power. One of these tribes, led by a man named Kulakane, rose above the rest, and was able to unite the Nords yet again to help in their effort. But just as they were on the verge of total domination, Kulakane was assassinated by his general Talos, who took control of every army instantly, and in doing so, took on a new name, Tiber Septim, after which he was swiftly crowned emperor and declared the beginning of the Third Era. On top of this as well, Tiber Septim also added himself as the ninth divine to the existing pantheon, because why not? Overall though, this era for Cyrodiil was mostly one of restoration and conquest, with many new emperors and political leaders taking power and losing it again over the years. all the way up until the Oblivion Crisis, which saw Daedra pouring through portals into the mortal world and sacking cities. With time though, this invasion too was defeated after Mehrunes Dagon, a powerful Daedric prince, was slain in his mortal form at the Imperial capital, something you actually get to play out in the Oblivion mainline game. After this, during the Fourth Era, otherwise known as when Skyrim takes place, while we don't get to actually see it ourselves, we hear many times about the Thalmor invasion and takeover of the Imperial City, which eventually was thwarted by the Imperial Legion army at the Battle of the Red Ring. So as you can see, Cyrodiil is no stranger to controversy. And because of not only its strategic geographical position, but all of the centralized wealth and power, everyone wants a piece. And speaking of power, at the center of Cyrodiil itself lies potentially one of the most important sources of power in the entire series, the White Gold Tower, also called the Imperial Palace. Almost impossible to miss, the Imperial Palace is an enormous spire that reaches into the sky at the center of the Imperial City, which is modeled after the famous Adamantine Tower, the oldest known standing structure in all of Tamriel, found in the Iliac Bay of High Rock. The White Gold Tower is rumored to have great magics or control of the Elder Scrolls themselves, and many believe that it may serve as a sort of anchor that keeps Mundus, the mortal realm, grounded and guarded against the chaos of Oblivion. Most interestingly though, during the Merethic era, there are many accounts of early Aelids and Nedic people mentioning that Cyrodiil actually used to be much different. You see, these early primarily nomadic peoples described the province as being covered in dense jungles and rainforests, with flora and fauna that would more quickly make you think of the Black Marsh or Valenwood than anything resembling modern-day Cyrodiil. Some have speculated that the White Gold Tower may be to blame, and some ancient scholars have even spun up rumors that Tiber Septim himself might have actually used the tower to terraform the lands many years ago, making them more hospitable for the Imperial race. Also, fun fact for a lot of you watching, a lot of rumors in the actual Elder Scrolls and Bethesda communities think this is all a retcon after Todd Howard wanted their next game to resemble Lord of the Rings more than what would have otherwise been a heavily forested jungle. But as to what the real truth is, it's hard to say. Either way though, Cyrodiil has served as the centerpiece for so many important events in the history of Tamriel. And in many ways, it could be argued that it's the most important province from a political standpoint. But I will have more to say on that later in the video. The thing is though, the region is actually quite bland when compared to others. You could easily use this setting in any generic fantasy world or game and it would instantly work, with goblins and trolls alike. But part of that familiarity is also what makes it so great, as it grounds what is otherwise a very strange and fantastical setting around a capital that is immediately recognizable. You could show someone certain scenes from, say, Morrowind, and they might think you're playing a sci-fi game. But outside of stepping into the actual Oblivion gates, the gameplay in Cyrodiil from Oblivion is distinctly medieval European inspired. And it's because of that most of my love for the Oblivion game actually stems from the writing and quests, some of the best Bethesda has ever done, and not really the setting. Because while Cyrodiil is amazing in so many ways, and key to a lot of the lore in the Elder Scrolls series, with some really core mysteries about its origins and some of the ancient structures that can be found, it leaves a lot to be desired in its actual implementation and design, which is too reminiscent of every other fantasy world you've ever played and lacks a lot of variety. In many cases, if you think something in Cyrodiil looks cool, it's even more interesting in one of the adjacent territories. Skyrim has better mountains, the Black Marsh has more scary swamps, Morrowind fascinating otherworldly influences, and Valenwood actually dense forests. But personally, I don't know, there's something about Cyrodiil that just feels like home. Not because of my nostalgia playing it as a kid, but because even playing Oblivion nowadays and discovering all that Cyrodiil has to offer is a perfect reminder of what Elder Scrolls as a series is all about. And it will always be the setting of one of the games that made me fall in love with this medium originally. But as you're about to see, other places in Tamriel can get really crazy and a lot more weird.